In this lecture, we're going to see how you can enable default properties for your C++ classes that you expose to QML with list properties. The behavior we want is to be able to add players to our football team without explicitly specifying that we are assigning these players to the players property. Something like this. You define your team, you put in your coach, you put in your captain, and then you add a bunch of players. This is very similar to the list model API. We can actually go to Qt Creator and go in the documentation to see that. You see that you define a list model, you put in a bunch of properties, and you can put in a bunch of list elements inside. This is the same behavior we want to build for our football team type. We can go back to edit here and open the last project. We're not going to create a new project for this because it is very easy to do, but I wanted to expose it as a different lecture so that you have more time to focus on this. It is very important. It is going to make your APIs more usable, but the price to do this is very low. All you have to do for this to work is put in the QClassInfo macro, specify the first parameter to be default properties. It should actually say default property. I just checked on my notes and I had messed up. And you specify the property here that is going to be the default property for your type here. In this case, we want the players to be our default property, so we put it in here. You may not believe it, but this is really all you have to do for this to work. Just remember that the default property string has to be exactly like this. And in the second parameter, you pass in your property that you want to be the default property. This classify macro is used for more other things. You can go in the documentation and read more about it. But for now, we just use it to expose our default properties. Now that we have this, we can go to main QML. We can actually copy this team because we want to have two teams. I want to have the other syntax also available to you. So let's put in another team, call it team2. It's going to have another name, let's say APR. Let's keep the data the same, really, it's not important. But the syntax we can use, we can take out the brackets here because we don't need them anymore, and take out the commas here because we can just add the players inside. The QML engine is going to recognize this as a default property, and it's going to work. It's not going to give us any error. Let's format this a little bit so that it is easier on the eye. Let's go down a little bit and clean this up. And this is really all. Okay, I want to change my output statements here to work on team2, just to show you that it is working. And I want to change the names of the players here to be 4, 5, 6, and Daniel 2, so that we see that when we are adding these to their respective lists in the C++ classes. If you remember, in the last lecture in the football team CPP, we put in a debug statement to let us know when we add a player to the football team. But in this case, we have two football teams instantiated in QML. We have team 2, which is APR, and we have team 1, which is Rayon Sports here. Let's run to see that our code actually works. If it doesn't work, we're going to get errors and we're going to fix them. You see that our thing is actually working. We are adding players to the first team, and we start adding players to the second team, 4, 5, 6, 2 for Daniel. And this is really working. We have 4 players in the team APR. This is what we are saying here. And if you look here, we really do have 4 players in the team 2, but we didn't assign a list to the players property like we did before. We are able to do this because we specified players here as our default property. I want you to know that this is just a syntactic sugar. It is just enabling you to write these things in this way because it is more readable. QML developers have been used to this way of programming, and it makes your code more readable by others. But internally, the QML engine is still storing this as a list and assigning the list to the player's property like this. This is really all we have to do to have default property enabled for our football team here. In the next lecture, we're going to show you how to work with grouped properties. I'll see you in the next lecture.